Welcome back. As you may or may not know, I'm known as Eli the Computer Guy. My current project is something called silicondojo.com. Basically, the idea being, what if high quality technology education was simply as accessible as water? So, anyways, one of the things that I do with silicondojo.com is I do one on one conversations, coaching sessions for trying to explain tech stacks to people. I always like to explain tech stacks, but careers, businesses, consulting, all that kind of stuff. Anyways, every Monday from 1 to 5, I sit here and I do 30-minute consultations with folks. And I've got quite a few. I've got 5 of them today. I'm actually recording this on Monday, so I've got 5 of these things coming up. And with that, I get a lot of the same types of questions, and so I do these particular videos just to answer those types of questions to other people, right? If I get the same type of question a lot, I might as well do a video so a lot of people can get the answer instead of one individual person. And how did that sound? How did that sound? Did you notice something? Did you notice something? Yep, that's right. That's right. Hey, there might let's look at the silver lining of this economic disaster, right? The one thing that might be good about Trump's tariffs is that it did force me to try to do something better with my audio system. I hear the complaints. I just want everybody out there to understand. I hear your complaints. I just don't necessarily always know what to do about your complaints. Again, that's the thing. Like a lot of people, when like a decision maker doesn't do something based off of your complaints, a lot of people think, oh, you're not listening to me. Oh, you don't care about what I'm saying. And a lot of times you're like, no, I get it. I get it. You're right. You're right. Audio is not the greatest in the world. I'm just not really sure what to do about it. But anyways, right, with the Trump tariffs now here, what are they saying? It's like up to 65% on imported Chinese goods now. It's up to like 65%. It's like 54% on some things, up to 65% on others. Crikey. Anyways, I was sitting there, I was looking at improving some things with my setup. I was like, ooh, I don't want to spend 65% more. So I went on to Amazon and I got this little audio thing. This is the Rode Wireless Pro. We'll both find out by the end of this video whether or not they're as good as people say they are. So anyways, I got this good thing about the Trump tariffs. But anywho, that's where I want to talk today about not just the Trump tariffs, but also Trump's policies and how this is going to affect the technology industry. Because I think this is going to be massively significant in ways a lot of people aren't necessarily expecting. The interesting part about doing this video is that I have so many non-Americans who watch my content and learn from me that, to be clear here, our complete and utter disaster, you know, might be your silver lining. Again, in a winner take all world, if the winner decides to blow his own feet off, guess what? They're probably not going to be the winner anymore. Maybe it's your turn to shine. But I think this is kind of interesting. I've been talking about this kind of thing for a long time because basically the American government has been causing a lot of problems for the technology industry for a long time at this point. And causing a lot of issues. And it'll be curious to see how their mismanagement of this core component of society will affect our standing in the world. And more importantly, again, for anybody who watches my content, what this will mean for you. Again, one of the things I talked about for a long time is John F. Kennedy, right? So John F. Kennedy created the most powerful force for empire that this world has ever seen. And whenever I talk about JFK, and whenever I talk about his, improvement of our military industrial apparatus, everybody always thinks of the Navy SEALs. Yes, he created the Navy SEALs. And one of the things that I argue is that the Navy SEALs are damn pansies. They are pansies, jacked up, steroided, can kill you with a look. pansies when it comes to actual empire building. You want to know the real powers behind empire building? That's right. It's the pocket protected nerds that joined the Peace Corps and went out in the world to teach everybody English. Because language is the number one unifier of any culture. If you can get other people to speak your language, you have already won. Right? Because when you have an argument, because when you have a discussion, because when any of that kind of thing happens, they now have to use your words, your language, and languages are designed, to do whatever the particular society wants to be done. Again, it's that whole argument that Italy has 50 words for love, and we have a gazillion words for how to make money or rip people off, right? It's the priority. The Italians want to love. We want to make more money, right? So if you get the other people to start using your words, it intrinsically changes how they start to look at the world, right? And if we look in the post World War II years, the United States has been an incredible influence. Again, not just militarily, but also societally, right? Popular culture wise. And so, one of the interesting things is that the world, again, whether or not everybody has always agreed with it, has gone along with a lot of the thought processes of the ways that we look at the world. And so again, as the technology industry booms, as the technology industry comes up, when you have Hewlett Packard, when you have IBM, when you have Xerox, when you have all these major companies, one of the big things to be thinking about is not just simply the technology they create, not just simply the patents that they have and all that kind of stuff, but the thought processes that they use to build technology. Again, think about this. As an American, right? When you sit down to learn a programming language and you learn the print function, when you learn all of this different stuff, think about the fact that you write everything left to right. Right? Other languages write right to left. What if when you were learning a programming language, what if when you sat down to learn Python, not only did you have to figure out the whole Python deal, but you also had to learn how to write and read right to left? What additional steps, what additional pain points would there be if fundamentally you had to rethink about the very concept of reading and writing? One of the valuable things is, again, how we've designed all of this stuff is it's designed within our paradigm. And this becomes very important again now in the modern world because, technology is like everything else. Or again, IT, computer technology is like everything else, right? There was a time when Great Britain was the leader in railroads, right? They were the best in railroad technology. And they were best for a long time. And then Americans got involved and we're like, ha. And then we were the best in railroad technology for a long time. And now the Chinese got involved and they're like, ha. And now they're the best in railroad technology. And they probably will be for quite a long time, right? The thing is, like when a technology comes out, initially it's hard, it's complicated. There's only there's resources to create something, the knowledge base, the institutional knowledge base to create something, right? It's in the centralized place, and so there's a natural monopoly there. Right? Again, even if you don't have a legal monopoly or anything like that, if you simply have all the people who understand the technology, if you have the resources to build that particular technology, you're going to end up having a monopoly over creating that technology. But then as time goes by, there's going to be more and more people that understand that technology. There's going to be more and more resources to create that technology. And that technology is going to spread. And then it's going to go all around the world. And at some point, you're going to have the English rail system. Which, I don't know. Maybe that is foreshadowing. Maybe that is foreshadowing for America, right? Again, we think about this with cars. Think about this with cars, right? Europe started in the automotive game, right? And the United States gets in the automotive game. It takes like 50 years. It takes like 50 years before we really get to like perfect cars. And then the Japanese get involved. and it takes them something like 30 years to perfect cars. And then the Koreans get involved, and it takes them 20 years to perfect cars. And now the Chinese get involved, and they just stomped all of our asses in 10 years. Like literally right now, the only reason we are not swimming in Chinese cars is simply because there are so many tariffs and trade restrictions. We won't allow it to happen. They overproduce something like 10 million cars per year. Like literally right now, China could basically replace the U.S. car market just with the production level that they have. Right? Things change. It's just how it goes. And so that's kind of an interesting thing to be thinking about with technology, IT. Again, when you start thinking about Python, you start thinking about Node, you start thinking about server systems and software as a service and infrastructure as a service and how servers function and all that kind of stuff. The reality is this technology is getting relatively long in the tooth. And realistically speaking, there is a massive question about whether we really are still in the lead. We're still in the lead, if you ignore the fact that China and Taiwan manufacture all the technology and actually create, again, most of the technology that we're using. We're in the lead if you ignore the fact many of the people that are in the United States doing most of the amazing developments, are foreigners that we gave visas to come to the United States. So yeah, so if you just ignore the fact that so much of our leadership, literally the foundations of which are based off of other countries, then we're in the lead. Right? But that's one of the interesting things to be thinking about. The foundations of where we think we are in the technology world versus where we actually are really have fundamentally changed over, a number of years. Again, 2 or 3 decades at this point. And so why this becomes important is because as the world keeps moving forward, there is going to start to be more and more of a question of why should the United States have the hegemony. Oh, I speak for a living and I screw up words anyway, right? Why we should have control over this aspect of how the world is designed, right? And the big issue is we have that control because of inertia, right? This is how things have been, and so that's how people keep doing things, right? Could somebody in the Middle East create a new programming language? Yeah, they could, right? Could China try to push out their new version of Python or Java or whatever else? Yeah, they could, right? Could all these things happen? Yeah, but that takes a lot of time. That takes a lot of energy. That takes a lot of money. You already have something that works well enough. Yeah, Americans are arrogant assholes, but you don't have to deal with them very often anyway. So you just kind of keep doing what you're doing. The problem is, though, is that the arrogance of the American politicians. Again, one of the things we have in the United States is this idea of manifest destiny that has not died. The idea that we are a superior people, and ergo, we should be able to tell the world what the world should do. Again, it's very interesting when you look at our policies towards artificial intelligence in China at this point, right? The very fundamental idea that we should have the right to tell China what level of AI is acceptable to them. I mean, think about this. And again, this isn't just right. You think about this with Biden, and you think about this with Obama and everybody beforehand. This idea that we should be able to tell China when they have progressed far enough. You have progressed as far as we feel comfortable with, so now you're going to need to stop. What? Again, it's not simply the idea that, oh, we are worried about China being a military threat, ergo, we're going to make sure we have the best weapon systems. We're worried about China being a military threat, ergo, we're going to make sure, that we have the allies and we have the partnerships and we have all this other stuff. It's we are worried about China, ergo, China needs to stop. And the issue is, again, with manifest destiny, with the idea that we are the superior race and that China needs to stop because we told them so, the issue becomes is that it bleeds into other areas, right? So the whole GPU market. So the idea you need high value, high quality GPUs in order to do AI, in order to do artificial intelligence. And so basically, the Biden administration says, okay, you can only sell China GPUs of a certain level. So, Nvidia gets kneecapped by our own administration over this. The other GPU companies get kneecapped by our own administration over this, and it is what it is. Well, then the issue is China being China, they start to go out and they start to look for other resources. They're like, we want to keep progressing as a society. We see no reason why we should stop just because this other country is uncomfortable. So we're going to go out and we're going to try to procure these goods from other places. And so that's one of the interesting things is going out and purchasing GPUs and such from other countries. And so then all of a sudden, the Biden administration starts putting restrictions against other countries, right? Middle Eastern countries now have to jump through hoops in order to buy GPUs because those GPUs may end up in China. South America has to jump through hoops in order to buy GPUs because they might end up in China, right? Biden administration starts putting all of these trade policies, these trade restrictions on GPUs because they might end up in China. Now think about this. If you're a Chinese technology professional, if you're a Middle Eastern technology professional, if you're a South American technology professional, your advancement is now being specifically stunted because the president of an entirely different country is worried about whatever the hell they're worried about. Right? One of the big issues, one of the big questions here is at what point do these types of restrictions force other nationalities to start looking at their options? Right? Again, for China, in order to create GPUs, right? In order to create a lot of processors, in order to create a lot of GPUs, it's a very expensive process. It's very time consuming, it's very expensive, it's very tedious, right? Hey, if we can buy the GPUs from this country, even if they're making a lot of money off of it, frankly, it makes a lot of sense if they can put resources somewhere else. We're going to put all of our resources into electric vehicles and we'll buy the GPUs from the Western world. Well, all of a sudden, they get locked off from the GPUs from the Western world, then they need to start focusing on creating GPUs because they're not going to stop. Why would they stop? Because we don't like it. And so they start producing GPUs. Well, the issue is, again, for the other countries that are around the world, all of a sudden they're not part of this. No, they're not part of the US thing, they're not part of the China thing. They're just trying to do, whatever it is that they're trying to do. And they're getting GPU restrictions because of our president. Right? China or other countries start producing GPUs, it might make a lot more sense to buy those particular systems. Why buy systems and equipment from a country that at any point in time can decide to kneecap you for any good old reason when you can buy those same systems from other places and, hopefully they don't try to kneecap you in the same way. Again, it is geopolitics, so how it works out after 50 years when we'll come back and we'll have a discussion then, right? But it starts to make countries think about it, about where do they want their supply lines coming from, right? Where do they want their vendors to be? Is this a tenable solution of having the United States be a primary vendor? It's like with in the Middle East. Again, it is an interesting thing with the Middle East. So there's a country in the Middle East called Israel, right? And they have treaties and all that with the United States. And one of the big things with the treaties with the United States is that they are allowed to buy the best military equipment that we have to offer in the region. We cannot sell to other powers in the region military equipment that is superior to Israel. So if we sell an F-35 or we sell fighter jets or tanks or any of that kind of stuff, we literally have to sell substandard versions of those to any other powers in the region. It's just how it is. Well, the curious thing about this, right, is a number of years ago, again with Trump, you had Erdogan and Turkey. So Turkey was one of the component manufacturers for the F-35. right? So Turkey, they wanted to buy the Patriot missile system. But in order to buy the Patriot missile system, one of their demands was that they were able to get the designs of the Patriot missile system and that they would be able to build components of the Patriot missile system in Turkey. Right, that was one of the big demands. So Trump administration said, no, you can only buy the completed Patriot missile system from us. We will not give you the designs, plans, allow you to build it, the whole 9 yards. So basically, Turkey decided, okay, well, we need our own missile defense system. So they went to Russia and they bought the S-400 or the S-500 system from Russia. So Russia's anti-aircraft, anti-missile system. Well, then Trump administration, I mean, it makes a lot of sense. Said, well, we don't want the F-35 flying back and forth right in front of these Russian missile systems because it will allow the Russian missile systems to understand better what the radar signature and all that kind of stuff of the F-35 are. So if you buy the Russian missile system, you cannot buy the F-35. And there was a whole brouhaha, and basically Turkey was tossed out of the F-35 program. Ha. We showed those inferior people what will happen if you screw with the United States. And what will happen is they built their own fifth generation fighter. Because again, Turkey is a rather large country. It's got 80 million people. Again, they are intelligent, they are resourceful, they are industrial, blase. And they did not want to be under the thumb of the United States, which makes a lot of sense. So they've created their own fifth generation fighter. I'll let other people argue about the actual quality of it. What then becomes interesting, though, is then you have Saudi Arabia. So Saudi Arabia is currently looking at upgrading their fighter fleets. They're looking at the fighters that they can purchase. And one of the things they looked at, what the United States was willing to offer, but the fact that they know specifically that any weapon system that they buy from the United States will be kneecapped in compared to Israeli systems is one of the reasons they're now looking at purchasing the Turkish fifth generation fighter system, because they can buy the best Turkish fighter that Turkey can provide them and not worry about whether or not their weapon systems will literally be limited based off of treaties that the United States already has with somebody that might be one of their adversaries in the future. And this is one of the ways that the landscape of the technology industry can change based off of the politics that are occurring. And this is the kind of thing that you need to be thinking about when you look at how United States politicians are basically dealing with the rest of the world. Now, along with this, so again, so we have Biden administration, last administration go in, again, try to limit GPUs. Limit GPUs to China, limit GPUs to the Middle East, limit GPUs to South America. And again, one of the important things there is like with Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia knows they're screwed. Again, you can know you're screwed and not quite know what the hell to do. Right? They know oil will run out. They know the value of oil is going to be done by the end of the century. Just because you know that problem doesn't necessarily mean you know what the exit ramp is. So they're doing a whole bunch of different things. Some of it's really weird, probably not going to work. Other things actually make a lot more sense. So one of the big things that they're looking at is data centers, right? Hey, what if we create AI data centers, right? They've got a lot of cash. They've got all this money from the oil revenue that they do have. They can dump that into data centers. Maybe they can create the world-renowned AI data centers, and that will be what makes the money into the next century or whatever else. Anyways, again, one of the big issues there is with those data centers. Again, there are trade restrictions that Biden put on between the United States and the Middle East and Saudi Arabia for being able to get enough GPUs for those particular data centers. And think about the chaos that causes. Think about the confusion and the frustration that causes. Think about that anger that causes. Think about if you are a computer scientist in Saudi Arabia and you're told you cannot move forward on your project because some 80-year-old senile president in the United States is scared you might do something that they don't like. how much love and faith and all that kind of stuff are you going to have towards a country that's like that? Or again, how many folks are going to be looking for the exit ramp? Again, this comes up with the NSA, right? Again, going back to the Obama administration, Snowden, and all that, right? So much of spying on American citizens, spying on foreign citizens, NSA doing all kinds of wacky stuff. And that's one of the things with regionalization of data. The idea that a nation's data about its citizens should reside within that country. And again, this is all political policy, right? If the NSA wasn't so overreaching, if the NSA and our intelligence apparatus wasn't so in contravention of what most of us think the Constitution would be, it wouldn't be that much of a question, right? But if you're a French person, if you're a German person, if you're a Brit, and you realize that at any time how our systems have been created, that the NSA and all that can be spying on you, taking your information, taking your data, the whole 9 yards, right? There's more and more impetus for the politicians of these countries to say no. The data for our citizens needs to stay within the country. So think about that. That then drives demand for regional data centers. So instead of creating bigger and bigger and bigger data centers in the United States, you start creating more distributed data centers throughout the rest of the world. Facebook data center, instead of having one, let's say even European Facebook data center, you have one in Italy, you have one in Germany, you have one in France, you have one in Portugal, you have one. Like it changes the politics change the architecture. And the architecture then drives what types of employees and what types of skill sets are needed by the companies that are building all this kind of thing. And that's where we now get to the Trump tariffs. The Trump tariffs. What's going on? I don't even know what's going on. I didn't know we had a problem with Canada. Can I be honest? I'm gonna say something, maybe horribly political, right? You're gonna know deep down what color I bleed when I say this. When did we have a problem with Canada? When did we have a problem with Canada? Again, we have a problem on the southern. We have a problem on the southern border. We have a problem with fentanyl. We have a problem with Chinese. The trade imbalance there. I have never. Can I be honest? I have never in my life. I do not believe. I've listened to a lot of people. I don't talk. I listen to a lot of people. I cannot remember a single time I've heard any American talk about those damn Canadians. Damn Canadians! Right? I mean, the only thing about the quote unquote damn Canadians that's ever come up is basically that they are under our military umbrella. And even with that, everybody like kind of just shrugs their shoulders. It's like, yes, they don't have to pay as much for self defense because we pay a hell of a lot of money for self-defense, and there's no way in hell we're going to allow Russia to invade Canada. Ergo, they're kind of able to ride on our defense coattails, just kind of because how the circumstances are. But at the same time, I've never heard American be like, yeah, therefore we need to stop defending that sphere of influence. It's just kind of like, oh well, it's how it goes sometimes, right? They get some free military defense because of how we've decided to build our defense apparatus. I have beyond that though, never heard a lot of screaming about the Canadians. But anyways, right? The Canadians are getting lambasted now. Again, we got tariffs going on. Canadians, Mexicans. So again, Trump administration put through a minimum of a 10% tariff rate. The interesting thing with this, though, is that it's an emergency measure. We're under an economic emergency. Why are we under an economic emergency? Because he literally says we're under an economic emergency. So tariffs are supposed to be dealt with through Congress. So Congress is supposed to negotiate tariffs. Everything gets signed off by the president, right? After they negotiate tariffs. So we already have treaties. We already have, free trade and all these kind of pacts and all that kind of thing. But back in 1977, Carter, oh, Carter, poor little Carter. Anyways, Carter apparently signed off on a law to give the president authority during economic disaster. So one of the things in the United States, one of the powers of how our system is supposed to work is that we do have a strong executive, we have a strong president in times of disaster. So essentially, they can go around Congress when things go to hell, right? So if somebody commits war against us, basically the president can command our troops to go defend us without having to go through Congress, right? If there's a big old disaster, the idea being is give more power to the president during these disasters so that they can handle the disaster. The issue that you then run into is how do you declare a disaster, right? So if Congress has to declare a disaster, then you get back to the whole problem of Congress has to agree on anything for it to go ahead. And so, even though the president might have the power once a disaster is called, that might be a convoluted mess. And so, we've come up with this asinine system where apparently the president can decide that there's a disaster. So, ergo, they can take all the power that they want to deal with the disaster that they declared. And yeah, even with the presidents that we've had in the past, they haven't taken crap nearly this far. But basically, now we have, again, the Trump administration. They declare that we have a disaster, ergo, they get all the power. And so, again, we've got tariffs going on and all that kind of stuff. The issue then becomes is what damage is this going to do to the technology industry? Again, especially here in the United States. Again, when we start looking at this, right? So these were 300 bucks, 300 bucks. Fuck me. So I'm not quite sure where these get shipped from. Let's say these got shipped from China. These will go up to $450. So a relatively small product. The price gets jacked up $450. Now again, when you think about a business, they're not buying these one off, right? A business buys these by the dozen, buys them by the hundred, right? That type of thing. If you're buying servers, you're generally, again, as a business, you're generally not buying one server. You're buying a 48U rack. Each one of those U's is a server. You're buying 48 racks or 48 servers per rack, and you might be buying dozens of racks of servers. Now, all of a sudden, right, that server might cost you $4,000. Oh, it's not going to cost you $4,000 anymore. It's going to cost you $6,000, right? The price of a server goes up by $2,000 a pop. You got 48 of those damn things in one rack. That's $100,000 per rack of servers plus, right? And again, we've got the GPUs, we've got all that, and that's relatively inexpensive servers and the whole 9 yards. And so now all of a sudden, you have all these companies, and they're looking at these capital expenses, and the capital expenses are going to go through the roof, and they only have so much money. You only have so much money. Again, that's one of the big things a lot of new people don't understand when you get in the technology business is a business only has one pot of money, right? Out of that pot of money, they buy servers. Out of that pot of money, they also buy toilet paper, right? Have you ever been at a business where they go from the Starbucks coffee to whatever that Lion coffee crap is? And you're like, what happened to the Starbucks coffee? It's like, well, we needed some more servers this year. So you get Lion coffee or whatever the fuck it's called, right? That's what happens, right? There's only so much money in the pot. And now all of a sudden, right, we have these government policies that are going to massively increase the cost for hardware because almost all of this hardware comes from outside of the United States. So one of the things to be thinking about now is, again, if you're a corporation, if you're a company, how do you mitigate these new costs? Right? So one of the things that we saw, again, over the past decade and a half, 15 years or so, is the movement to the cloud. IaaS, infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, metal as a service, software as a service, obviously. Well, one of the big reasons for that, beyond technology, is actually regulation and taxes. Right? So if I buy a rack of servers, cost me $100,000. I throw it into a colo facility. Depending on the state I'm in and all that kind of thing. One of the weird parts about that is I can actually get taxed off of that. So I actually have to pay taxes on these assets that I own, right? And so, anyways, one, you have to pay taxes on the assets that you own, and two, there's a depreciation. So, like when I buy the asset, I can't just say this is $100,000, so I'm taking that off my taxes. There's a depreciation, so I can take $30,000 off the first year, $30,000 off the second year, $30,000 off my taxes. Right? There's this whole mess of taxes and all that kind of thing. Well, here's the interesting thing, right? So if I buy, let's say I go to buy an exchange server. So I got to buy an exchange server. I buy a couple of backup servers for clustering or whatever. Let's say it's going to cost me $100,000. So I can't deduct that entire $100,000 immediately. It has to go through this depreciation schedule. I may actually get taxed on the fact that I now own this equipment. So it's going to cost me more money. And I have to put $100,000 on the table to buy the equipment. So I could do that, or I could buy Office 365 and just pay $10 per month per user to use Office 365. I don't have a $100,000 outlay immediately. I don't have to worry about it. Depreciation schedules. I get to deduct it, all of it, immediately off my taxes, and I don't actually own anything, so I don't get taxed on the thing that I don't own. So therefore, Office 365 makes a lot of sense. Again, I remember this with a CTO. I was talking to a buddy of mine, and they were talking about this one CTO, and the CTO literally went to the chief financial officer and told the chief financial officer, "Is like, look, it's time to upgrade our exchange servers. I need $50,000, to write off to do the upgrade." And the CFO literally looked at the CTO and said, "You're getting Office 365." And the CTO was like, "Wow, no." And the CFO said, "I wasn't asking." Because right, that's the reality. Again, how taxation and regulations and all of this kind of stuff work. This affects how businesses operate. And so one of the things to be thinking about now, right? So if all the hardware that comes in the United States, that's basically from other countries, it's getting jacked up by anywhere between 10 to 65%. I have to. Patrick Boyle said that. I'm going to put that 65% on Patrick Boyle. I'm not sure about the 65%, but at least like 55%. Anyways, right? Anywhere between 10 to 50%, the cost is going to increase for this hardware coming in the United States. Now, I mean, if I was running a corporation and you told me the hardware cost was going to go through the roof, you know what I would do? I'd build a data center in Mexico. Or by a data center in Canada. Again, they talk about that, right? No advertising is bad advertising, or no marketing is bad marketing, right? Or any marketing is good marketing, whatever right? Well, I mean, here's the thing: the Trump administration will not shut up about Mexico and Canada. So if I'm a CFO, if I'm a CEO, and I've got Mexico and Canada on my mind, as I'm looking at the cost of building data centers going through the damn roof, we're like, huh. Well, I've heard the weather in Mexico is actually quite lovely. And, if you're worried about cooling costs for data centers, being up in the north, that would actually probably also save you money off of things like cooling costs. Canada and Mexico. I might see a solution to our problem here, right? And that's one of the things like to consider with this, because again, think about this: like when you're building out technology infrastructure, this is millions and millions of dollars, right? One of my students, or one of my viewers, or whatever, a good guy, met him back in Seattle, and he was like, "Oh my God." And then I talked with him, and I was like, "Oh my God!" He was one of the people that was responsible for the initial Azure deployment. And when I say the Azure deployment, I mean the actual Azure deployment, right? He was responsible for 500,000 servers being deployed when Azure was initially getting spun up. And again, it was really interesting, right? He was talking about how he had a direct view of all the supplies going into Intel, because when you need 500,000 servers, you need 500,000 CPUs. So he had to verify that Intel was producing at the CPUs at the appropriate rate so that they could actually have enough servers deployed, right? But anyways, think about this with this guy. 500,000 servers. So you sit there and I say, well, server costs $4,000. Now it's $6,000. Ah, boo hoo. Imagine that X 500,000. Imagine that times the server racks. Imagine that times the power distribution units. Imagine that times the cooling systems. Imagine that times the raised flooring. Who manufactures raised floors? I don't know who the fuck manufactures raised floors, but I'm betting that's probably not America. Think about that. At what point do you start thinking, huh, I could deploy this here, or, and again, one of the things to be thinking about in the world of technology is that things change. Again, one of my arguments for a while now has been this whole question about CDNs, the real value of CDNs, something called content delivery networks. So the idea with content delivery network is the concept is that you want your servers as close as possible to the visitors to your site or to your service to decrease latency, right? The farther physically away that people are from the servers, the higher the latency is. Well, back when we have 56K connections, that really matters. We start getting T1 connections, it does matter. You get DSL connections, it matters still. But you start getting like fiber optic to the home, does it really matter? Like if I'm here in North Carolina, does it really matter if the server is in Atlanta or St. Louis or San Francisco? Again, once we start talking about these latency things, again, and if you're not doing video games, if you're not doing real-time communication, if you're doing FTP, if you're doing uploads, if you're doing downloads, if you're doing most of the stuff that most people do you really, does it literally matter if your latency is 20 milliseconds or 60 milliseconds, right? If you're essentially FTP, you're doing some kind of file transfer, does it matter if your latency is 60 milliseconds? And you have fiber optic lines, all that kind of thing. So if you're a business owner and you're looking at these massive technology deployments, again, putting it into Canada, putting it into Japan, putting it into Mexico, putting them somewhere else, putting them to Saudi Arabia, is that as infeasible as it would have been even a decade ago? Again, one of the big things to be thinking about when you talk about folks from around the world. Again, one of the reasons that people come to the United States is because it's so easy to do business, right? When you go to Europe, Europe is not Europe. Europe is not Europe. Europe is it is what it is. You're European. I don't know how to explain it. Like they're kind of sort of together, kind of sort of not, right? You've basically got this one market that's actually like 50 different markets and all kinds of wacky ass stuff going on, right? And so there's a big push of hey, if you want to become really successful in the technology world, if you really want your product to explode, come to the United States, build and deploy here. But again, what we're starting to see now with visas, right? We have student visas. So again, the people that are helping to build the foundations of our society, if they go onto Facebook and they say something, again, curiously enough, about Israel, they're now literally getting kicked out of the United States. The country, our Constitution, right? The freedom of speech is one of our key components of our entire society. Now, if you put up posts that our current president doesn't like, you will be kicked out of the country. Is that a risk you're willing to take? Right? What if you're the next Sergey Brin? What if you're the next person who wants to build a great company in the United States, but you don't like what's going on in the Middle East? Again, there's very reasonable people that are unamused what's going on in the Middle East right now. So you come to the United States, you pick up everything, you come to the United States, you sign leases, you do all the stuff, you pay money, right? You pay international, tuition to come to our schools. And if you say something the administration does not like on Facebook, you can be kicked out of the country. Again, it starts to become options, right? If you're somebody that's from outside the United States and you're looking, you're like, look, I want to progress. I want to progress my career and my life. I want my family's life to be better. Maybe I can help the people back home. I think I can make the world a bit better. I do not like what the United States is doing. I am revolted by what the United States is doing militarily at the moment, but right, it's a place to become successful. That's a hard. It's like Now think about this. Now think about that decision process. All the same things. And if you say boo about your honest feelings on Facebook, everything you've built in the United States can be destroyed in the blink of the eye, and you can be chucked the hell out. Is that a risk you're willing to take? And so the curious question then becomes, as a technology professional, is what does this world then look like? Again, back in 2000, right? We had the Y2K bug came up. There's an issue with timestamps from the older programming languages. They couldn't handle swap. When the year was going to switch over to 2000, we all thought life was going to end. The thing was, cool kids did not want to work on timestamp issues. So we had these cool fiber optic lines, T1 lines. And so the idea was to ship all this boring coding work over to India. They could do the boring coding work while our people does the cool stuff. Right. This created the idea of the world is flat. The idea that essentially you can hire the best, right, people from anywhere around the world that essentially has a fiber optic connection. If you have an internet connection, you can hire those people. And again, it's interesting now. So you have people that is normal to hire contractors out of India. It's normal to hire contractors out of Ukraine. It's normal to hire contractors out of Brazil, around the world, because of how the technology changed how people were able to do business, right? And so one of the questions that then comes up is, if you look at what our politicians are doing in regards to international relations, international trade, all of these types of things, is this the pivotal moment where the rest of the world and even Americans start rethinking about where America sits in the technology paradigm? Again, think about this, right? So I know more than enough software development shops that outsource to somewhere. Again, Ukraine and Brazil, all kinds of different places. At what point does it start to make more sense, not just to outsource the technology support, the coding or all that, but to actually outsource the infrastructure as a service? Do I feel comfortable continuing to buy server centers and that type of thing in the United States, or does it start to make more sense doing that somewhere else around the world? And how does that change things? Again, things to be thinking about, from a technology professional standpoint, is remember we get paid in order to support companies, right? Even now, even in 2025, we are still considered what's called a cost center. So I was told back in 2000, back when I was getting my MCSE in 2000, my MCSE instructor said, one of the sad things right now is that we are still considered cost centers by companies, right? So there's profit centers and cost centers. Profit centers are things that drive profit, drive revenue to the company. Cost centers are things that just simply seem to cost money. Toilet paper is a cost center. Toilet paper and geeks are cost centers. I'll just put that on the table, and that is real. That is real. Anyways, so one of the things to be thinking about too, again, as a technology professional, is as these tariffs come online, they've now come online. How does that change our economy, especially when we go into a recession, right? So think about this. So we do like $800 billion a year in trade to China. So they buy like 300 billion from us, and we buy whatever. It's a huge trade deficit, but it's, let's say, 800 billion from China. All right, it's trillions of dollars around the world. So if you put a 10% tariff, or if you put a 50% tariff, right? If I said that sales, import export between the U.S. and China is going to go down 50%, right? That seems ridiculous. That seems absolutely and utterly ridiculous. But if we said 5%, if you increase prices, taxes to 50%, 50+% for stuff coming in from China, does it seem reasonable that people will buy 5% less. 5%. If you're talking about $800 billion, that's then $40 billion in lost economic activity by one country. Again, if you're talking about trillions of dollars around the world, again, 5%. 5% is $50 billion in lost activity for every $1 trillion in activity that we had a couple of weeks ago. $50 billion. How much money do you make per year? Right? If the average salary in the United States is, let's say, $50,000, that means every $1 million is 20 man years. $10 million is 200 man years. $100 million is 2,000 man years. And $1 billion would be 20,000 man years. So 20,000 times 10 is 200. So we do like $500 billion. That comes out to about 1 million man years of economic activity has disappeared. Do you not think that will have an effect on technology professionals being hired, systems being deployed, the whole 9 yards? So I think that's the issue that we're running into right now, is that our administrations, again, whether it's Democrat or whether it's Republican, I hate them both at this point. I hate them both. Again, when I'm screaming about Biden, that means I'm MAGA, and when I'm screaming about Trump, it means I'm woke. Nope, I hate them all. I hate them all. But when we look at that, what does that mean for our profession moving forward? What happens when low-cost hardware now becomes kind of expensive hardware? Again, an Apple computer, right? You thought Macs were bad at $3,000 a pop. MacBooks were bad at $3,000 a pop. What happens when they're $4,500 a pop? Again, microphones, $300. Now they're $400. They'll be $450. What happens when the cost of all this hardware dramatically goes up? We've been in a low-cost environment for so long. We're used to that low-cost environment, right? What happens when the people that thought they were going to be able to be in the United States are simply stripped of their ability to come to the United States? What happens when the people that were thinking about coming to the United States see what happened to their buddies and decide, hell no, that's not going to happen to me? What happens when the countries around the world and the people in those countries get sick, truly, viscerally disgusted with our policies? What happens when Microsoft, the word Microsoft, becomes viscerally revolting? What happens when Apple makes people queasy? Right? Zig Ziglar, used to say, you sell the sizzle, not the steak. Right? You sell the dream, not the actual product. What happens when that dream becomes rotted? The things that I'm pondering, just the things that I'm pondering. What is the answer? I don't know. I think we're going to have a massive shakeup in the United States. I think we're going to have a massive, massive shakeup. And again, I think the technology industry is going to have a massive shakeup. I've talked about it many times before, again, with policies, right? We had 1% interest rates for way too long after the Great Recession. Again, high net worth individuals, they were borrowing money at 1%. They were putting that money to wherever they thought they could get it to do what's something called chase returns. They thought technology companies were the place to get the best returns, borrow money for 1%, get 100% return back. That sounds really good, right? And so we have more and more money getting driven into tech companies long after it made a lot of sense. And so we're now in this world where our technology companies have been built off of an idiocy of 1% interest rates and crap, essentially. At the exact same time, the actual policies of our government are now trying to kneecap us. And where does that put us as technology professionals at the end of the day? Will the technology profession die? No, no. We're gonna need more technology. We're gonna need more technology. Again, new technology comes out, you always need people to support it, right? But what that technology looks like, I think, is going to change a lot. Again, and it goes back to my argument I've been arguing for 16 years. I've been on YouTube for 16 years, and the entire time, you know what do I argue? Technology professionals use technology to solve problems. And I think the people that focus on solving problems and figure out what is what is the problem of 2025, right? Craig Newmark created Craigslist, or Craig Newmark, yeah, Craig Newmark created Craigslist. And that was the thing. Craigslist revolutionized the world, destroyed newspapers, literally destroyed the journalism industry. Nobody talks about it, right? Craig Newmark came up with Craigslist, right? PHP, MySQL. What if there was a classified ad system that just that just worked? You didn't have to pay any money for it, right? And that was the thing. That was the problem. That was the problem of 1995. Right? You're sitting there, you don't want to pay $25 to put your ad in the newspaper. The newspaper is pretty crappy anyway when you got these fancy internet thing. What if somebody came up with a better system? Right? What did he do? He came up with Craigslist. Again, if you look at Facebook, email and all that, it was okay, but wasn't great. Basically, you come up with Facebook, you come up with social networking, right? That was a 2005 problem to solve. One of the arguments that I've made is for a long time now, we haven't really been solving problems. Again, we've been told VR is the future. Nobody wants VR. Blockchain is the future. Nobody wants blockchain. This is the future. That is the future. Again, think about it. Like, since 2015, when was the last really impressive revolutionary technology that you actually cared about? Not a lot. Again, small, iterative changes. And I would argue, again, with the tech companies, that they're chasing returns, they're chasing how they think they can easily make money, which isn't necessarily the same thing as trying to solve problems. I think it's been a long time since our tech industry has really been looking at solving problems for people versus just trying to get investor money. So I think that would be my argument going into the future, which would be the same argument I had 16 years ago. If you really want to be a technology professional, figure out how to solve problems in this new world, and understand what that world looks like. As I've always said, maybe the most American thing is to leave the United States, right? The Quakers during the Vietnam War. If you go down to Costa Rica, Verde, Monte Verde. It's called Monte Verde. There's a place, I think it's called Monte Verde. I went there. There's been so many places, I forget the name. Anyways, there were Quakers during the Vietnam War, right? Quakers are pacifists, right? They don't believe in use of military force. They were disgusted by what the U.S. government was doing, so they went to Costa Rica and they built a cheese factory, which is kind of nice. I don't know, it's kind of weird. I've been there. It's like, oh, cheese. But again, it's one of those interesting things I think about. You always think about the influx of Americans coming to the United States. The question, as a technology professional, is at what point is the most American thing you can do is to leave the United States? Again, you think about this with things like robotics, right? So there's a company, Zipline. They have the Zips. So zips are these autonomous aircraft that drop blood and medical supplies in Rwanda. Right? Well, the thing is, here we have lots of regulations on how drones can be used. Because, oh my God, if a drone falls out of the sky and hurts somebody, all hell's going to break loose. Well, the interesting thing in Rwanda, right? They have people dying. They have people die. The road system is garbage. It's really hard to get stuff from point A to point B. So they have people dying in hospitals. And so basically, they looked at it and they said, yes, is there a risk one of these zip aircraft are going to follow this guy and kill somebody? Yes, there is a risk there. But we have so many people dying every day anyway. It's less of a risk that an aircraft will follow this guy and kill somebody versus the risk that people are going to die. Right? So the zips have been running out of Rwanda for a decade, I think now. And again, autonomous, again, we hear about autonomous delivery and all that kind of stuff. They've actually been doing it day in, day out for 10 plus years at this point. And again, one of the arguments I made for a long time is you really want to push forward in the technology realm, going to places, again, with less regulations and that type of thing, might make a lot of sense. Again, you want to get experience building data centers. Maybe now is the time to go and support building data centers in Morocco. Right? How would you build a data center in Morocco versus the United States? And again, there's different needs. There's different needs around the world. I think about that with Huawei. Right? So years ago, Interop New York. So there was a conference called Interop, had a New York version. Anyways, and Huawei was there, and they were doing their presentation. So again, this was 2011, 2012, and they were doing their presentation. And one of the arguments is why would you buy Huawei when you can buy Cisco? And it was curious because they were like, well, because Cisco equipment is designed to work in first world server rooms. So first world server rooms are cold, they're clean. You don't think about it, but they're clean. They've got all that kind of stuff. They're like, well, a lot of our clients for Huawei equipment, maybe it's cold, but it's not necessarily clean. Again, think about if you're in a desert, you're in a kind of dirty environment. Again, India, I don't know, that Indian soil. It's funny. Like you wake up in India and you can look out, it's got this beautiful view of the mountains. Oh, looking out at the vista in India at like 5:30, 6 o'clock in the morning, most beautiful thing you ever seen in your life. Just fucking bam. By 7 o'clock in the morning, there is so much dust and dirt just in the air. You can't see, you can't see 3 blocks away. That's how it is, right? So in that environment, does Cisco equipment make sense? If you've got fans, if you've got active cooling systems that are bringing things in and sucking it out, does that make sense? And what Huawei did is they had entirely sealed equipment. When you bought their routers and when you bought their switches, they were entirely sealed. The cooling fans or the cooling fins and that kind of thing, the heat sinks were basically on the outside of the unit so that you could put the equipment into, sub quote unquote standard environments and it would still survive and it would still do its job. That's the difference between the equipment that Huawei was selling and the equipment that Cisco was selling. Now think about that. That's not about latencies. That's not about backplanes. It's not about, quality of service or prioritization or any of that kind of stuff. It's literally how do you design the equipment to be cooled? So, anyways, there you go. There are some thoughts. What's the answer? I don't know. I don't know. Oh, I have thoughts. I have thoughts for myself. One of the reasons I bought this thing. But we might talk about that later. We'll see what happens. But yeah, for any tech professional in the world, these are going to be some curious times. These are going to be some curious times. Again, because it's just, what I think about is like with the Great Recession. I talk about that where the dominoes fell. Again, I have my business. We were still doubling. We were still doubling every 60 to 90 days. Oh, Bear Stearns fell? Sucks to be Bear Stearns. We were still fucking accelerating, right? Oh, property market has issues? Thank golly, I'm not worried about the property market. We were still accelerating. Oh, you got problems? We were still accelerating. Till the dominoes smacked us. Till the dominoes squooshed us. And I think that's one of the big things to be thinking about. Because again, like I look at this like with the news. Like even now, right? The tariffs, these tariffs just went into effect. Went into effect on Saturday. I'm recording this on Monday, and so I was like, oh, right, our economy hasn't blown up yet. And it's like, yeah, but because it's like even now, like okay, so many companies already have um, stock, right? So that stock is still in their systems. So even though tariffs went in effect now, right, the stock that they have is being sold based off of where it was. But then how is that going to change as we move forward? Again, I think about that when I was still doing computer repair when there were the floods in Thailand. I had no idea. Something like 50% of hard drives are manufactured in Thailand. So when Thailand had those massive floods, the cost of hard drives went through the roof, right? A 500 gig hard drive went from something like $150 to $200. Again, one of the curious things that I found was I could go to Best Buy. If you went to newegg.com, a hard drive costs you 200 bucks. You go to Best Buy, they'd have 20 hard drives on the shelf for like $45. And I go in and I buy 20 hard drives. You'd always see those retail people looking at me like, what's wrong? What's this guy doing? Well, the reason is because again, with their supply chain and pricing and all that kind of stuff, they had previously purchased this hardware. They had already slapped a sticker for this particular price. So even though it was later, right? Everybody else had already jacked their prices up. Best Buy, you could still buy the hard drives for 45 bucks a piece. Right? Takes time for all of this stuff to move through the system. And the curious thing, like one of the things I hear from so many people is like, well, but Trump's not that stupid, right? When Trump sees that there's problems, when Trump sees that it's not going the way that he thinks it's going to go, when people start having pain, he'll pull back, right? He'll pull back. But what I want you to understand is that that's the supremacist mentality. That is the mentality of the supremacist. When I get to the point that my actions are causing me pain from other people, then I'll just stop and then it'll be okay. Right? The supremacist believes that they control the situation. The pain happening to them is because they decided to allow the pain to happen to them, and therefore they can stop it at any time. The issue is, though, with how our government is operating, even if he decides to stop, does that stop the dominoes from falling? If you're Canadian, can you ever trust us again? If you're Mexican, can you ever trust us again? If you're European, can you ever trust us again? Right? If you're a rising economy and you're trying to decide, the polar axes of the world, China or Europe or the United States, if you're looking at what road to go down, are you going to be as comfortable going down the route to the United States? Even if while I'm recording this particular video, Trump says, I'm wrong, mea culpa, stops it all. Stops it all. Does that actually stop the dominoes from falling? Again, if I was a European or anybody not American, I hate to say foreigner. If I was a foreigner, like fuck you, I'm not a foreigner. You're a foreigner, anyways, right? If I was not American, again, like when I look at what's going on, how comfortable would I be risking coming to the United States at this point? Anyways, anyways, hopefully you got some good audio here. Hopefully the Trump tariff has gotten you some good audio for this particular video. We shall see. Um, Make sure my battery hasn't died. See, I got my little. Gotta be careful here. That's my little thing that comes in, and that's connected to the phone. The battery does look pretty low though. I didn't recharge it. I literally got this morning. I got it this morning, and I wanted to test it out. So, anyways, if nothing else, the Trump tariffs may have or may not, we'll find out, gotten better audio for my videos. We'll see. So, anyways, things to ponder. Yeah. Oh, this sucks. Recessions suck. Oh, recessions suck. Oh, economic. I think that's the thing to realize too, is like for any of the young ones out there, this is just gonna suck. Like everybody wants like rhyme and reason. Yeah, it just sucks. It just goes stupid. It just goes so fucking like it just goes sideways. It just goes. It's like with a car accident. Like all the way up until cars start hitting each other, right? Maybe you could go left, maybe you could go right. But here's the thing, right? The cars just once there's that black ice on the road, once you hit the brake and the brakes don't work and you're on inertia, you don't you don't get to decide what happens next. Right? You're just sliding and there's cars and there's just a mess and you just like you go left because you go right because you go right. You got everything ah, right? That's what these economic disasters are. Anyways, see y'all later.